folks, welcome back to the Podcast Digest. My name's Dan Lizette, and thank you again for taking the time to listen to another weekly installment of the show where I'm here to tell you about the things that I think you should be subscribed to, and my own personal promise that you will not be disappointed if you do so. Once again, I hope you guys have been enjoying all the recent episodes. I've had a lot of great interviews and have been really humbled by the response that I've received from a lot of you listening. If you have enjoyed, again, as I like to ask, just a couple of minutes, please, a review on iTunes or Stitcher would be greatly appreciated, and it helps the show out a great deal. Also, share it with a friend at Twitter and Facebook. You can find the show at Pod Digest on Twitter or facebook.com/The Podcast Digest. On to this week's episode. I am going back once again to a recommendation show. It is time to bring you a smattering, a selection of new shows and shows that I think that you will enjoy. But like I did last time, a couple months back, where David Meyer from Podcasts Without Borders joined me, I've asked for a co-host to come on the show with me and to bring a different perspective and some additional podcast recommendations. And this week, I'm very happy to be joined by Ryan Steiner from ryansteiner.com, who does basically the written version of the Podcast Digest over on his site with Ryan's podcast reviews. Ryan, thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Well, it's great to have you, and it's great to share the load with somebody and bring even more great content and more great podcasts that these folks should be listening to. So for anyone who's not familiar with you or what you do and your site, tell them a little bit about it.
Well, like you said, it's pretty straightforward. It's Ryan's Podcast Reviews, and mostly I write reviews for podcasts. I also do some recaps, and I have done a couple network guides where it's not really reviews, but it kind of gives a more in-depth look at shows on Earwolf Network and Radiotopia. I did guides for both of those, but mostly just write about podcasts and try to help people find shows that they will love.
So you're obviously a big podcast fan. How long have you been listening?
I've probably been a heavy listener for about 3 or 4 years and sort of flirted with podcasts for a couple years before that. But I've always been a big fan of public radio, so it dovetailed nicely when I was finally able to use my smartphone to easily listen to podcasts. It kind of avalanched. It picked up pretty quick once I had the capability to easily listen to podcasts.
And how many subscriptions are you sporting nowadays?
Let's look and get the official count. 154.
Wow. See, folks, you guys have given me crap about my 90 plus. Ryan's got us all beat with 154. Now I feel very insufficient.
Well, these are not all shows that I'm very much a mood listener. So I have shows to fit every kind of mood. And then, the ones I watch weekly to see if there's something that sticks out to me, something that I want to see right away. A lot of stuff that I add to playlists to kind of check back in with later. So, it's not all stuff that I listen to all the time, but yeah, generally I like to have a big selection for any particular way I might be feeling in any given day.
Yeah, those ones that you don't always listen to, I call those my monitoring subscriptions, where I'm just monitoring their new releases and see if something catches my eye. So
yeah, and a lot of these shows too are ones that I want to they're kind of tagged to write about later, so I've maybe listened to one or two and they've piqued my interest, and then I want to get back to them and see and listen, give a more in-depth listen to see if it's something I want to write about. So yeah, there's a lot of variety there.
And are there any particular genres that you're bigger fans of?
It's kind of changed a lot since I've been doing the site since January, and when I started, it was almost entirely comedy podcasts that I liked the most. My Brother and Me was a big one, and Comedy Bang Bang were probably my two most frequented shows, and everything kind of around that. Recently, I have really started to enjoy not necessarily, I like the storytelling genre, but I also like the more documentarian style too, that maybe tells a a little more singular point of view than what the storytelling does, where it's kind of, a back and forth between the storyteller and the subject. So I've really enjoyed that recently. And I like the interviews. I like interviews a lot. Just I love the back and forth. I love learning the ins and outs of each interviewer's style. They all have their own way of doing things. So you learn about the interviewer, and then you learn about the interviewee each show. So I'd say those are probably where I lean toward. But yeah.
Well, excellent. I wanted folks to kind of get to know you a little bit so that they know that you're an expert, and to put some real stock behind some of the recommendations we're going to talk about here.
I don't know if I'd go so far as expert, but if you say that, we'll go with it. How about that?
I like what you're doing on your site, and anyone with 150 plus subscriptions, I think, has to at least flirt with the concept of expert label in the podcasting world. So
okay, we'll go with that.
All right. So in my original format, which is, become a hashtag original format or quote unquote original format, way back in the early days of the Podcast Digest, I would open each show with something I would call a listener pro tip, but with the co-host, I'd like to make it a little discussion subject. And we were talking about, before we hopped on the recording session here, about some of the things going on in the world of podcasting, and we bantered around a few topics. And one of the ones that I wanted to talk to you more about is some of the diversity in podcasting, or probably more appropriately, the lack of diversity in podcasting, or at least it appears at a first glance. I mentioned to you that I have put forth a considerable effort over the past few months to make sure that a lot of the great shows that I listen to that do have women producers and hosts are represented in my back catalog here at the Podcast Digest. And I've been very fortunate to be joined by the likes of, Phoebe Judge and Sarah Stewart, Helen Zaltzman, and Vanessa Lowe. And hopefully that's just the beginning of folks that I'll be able to ask to come on the Podcast Digest and talk about. But I understand that you've made some observations yourself about the diversity, or again, lack thereof, in podcasting. What are your thoughts?
Well, it seems kind of, just from what I've, anecdotally speaking, I haven't looked or consulted a calendar, but it does feel like since Serial, there have been a lot more podcasts that have been hosted by women that I have seen. Even, I was talking about Earwolf before, but even their new shows, we have Womp It Up, which is 2 women co-hosts. Then there's the special guest, Lauren Lapkus. And then, so those are, 2 pretty big shows, and they'd had 1 or 2 shows hosted by women, but that's a pretty big leap. And then their sister network, Wolf Pop, has a number of shows hosted by women, which is great. And I don't know if it's something to do with Serial proving that a hit show can be hosted by a woman, which would be ridiculous to wait for that, because obviously it can be. But it seems like since then there's been kind of an explosion, or at least of shows that have come to my attention where maybe they wouldn't have before. So I think that's great. But there's, this weird thing where iTunes sort of dominates perception of what podcasts are, and because there's a lot of shows that are hosted by men in the top 100 or 20 or whatever section of the charts you look at, that I have seen this perspective that there aren't any good shows by women, or that women aren't doing much. But there are definitely women making awesome podcasts, but they're just not in the charts for whatever reason, which is really unfortunate, because like I said, there are some great shows that are hosted by women.
You're right. There's been a lot more recently, and at least a lot more featured, or ones that are of larger fame, if you will. One that comes to mind, NPR, is Invisibilia, which was a cousin of This American Life, hosted by 2 women. And I know that you've recently done some work on your site with Radiotopia, and Robin Mars over there has, in the past 12 months especially, put out, again, sort of as I was describing some of my recent interviews, a real tangible effort to make sure that great shows are brought to his network that do have women hosts, and there are a lot of them there as well.
Yeah, and I wasn't sure what the timeline was on that, but absolutely, Radiotopia, The Heart, Fugitive Waves, which is great, by the Kitchen Sisters. what was Criminal, led by Phoebe Judge.
Strangers, Leah Tao.
Strangers. Oh, Strangers. I love Strangers. And they are different in their own ways. It's not like, I don't know how to describe it, but it brings a different tenor to the whole podcasting landscape, and I think it's so important to try and highlight those shows as often as we can, which you've done a great job doing, like you said, of highlighting those recently. But yeah, hopefully, maybe with Sarah's Koenig show with Serial, it showed that it was made it a more welcoming space for women to feel like they could really participate and be a part of. And we're definitely seeing the benefits of that now with some great shows.
And lead and host shows, I think, is really where I'm drawn.
Yes.
Because I think women have been on podcasts from the
yeah.
beginning, but where the difference is now, like you said, that they could head a hit show, so to speak, because, women in radio or women in podcasting have always been there. And in my conversation a few weeks back with Helen Zaltzman, she brought this up, where it was them finally breaking out of the sidekick role or of just feeding the lead male host, some snarky comments or whatever the case may be, or, worse, just being, eye candy, so to speak.
Yeah.
That we've gotten, at least in many of these instances in these shows that we've talked about, far beyond those roles anymore. And that's excellent, because that's where I think, let's produce the best stuff, for a subscriber, be it a man host, a woman host, whoever can do it the best. And so many of these shows that we're describing are proving that in many of these cases, women are doing it excellently.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great distinction to make, of moving out from just the sidekick role, which unfortunately was where it was for a long time, and into the leadership roles.
Yeah, I think we can blame Howard Stern for that.
Yeah, let's just blame him for everything.
Yeah,
podcast.
We'll blame him for everything. But the reality is, it's been like that a long time before Howard. But
yeah, and what the exciting thing about podcasts is, like, you had your discussion with Vanessa Lowe from Nocturne, and she was saying that it's kind of wild territory. There's a lot of unexplored spaces in the podcasting world, and so I'm glad to see now that it's not just following in the same patterns of other traditional media, that there's more equal representation between men and women than what we've seen in other spaces. So I hope that trend continues.
And folks, well, Ryan has a huge subscription list, and mine is pretty large as well. And I've also put out a bunch of episodes of this show. And, Ryan mentioned that he's got his website up and going. I assure you, there are still a vast expanse of shows out there that we're not covering. So I'm going to speak for Ryan for a quick second. If you guys know about shows that we've not mentioned, some that women creators are doing, I know that I would love to know about them. Ryan, I'm sure you'd agree.
Absolutely.
Hit us up on Twitter or email or comment on the websites. Let us know what we should be hearing, and we'll do our part to make sure that the light gets shined on these great folks who are doing work that everyone should be hearing.
Definitely.
All right. Speaking of great stuff, that's what we're here to talk about, folks. We're here to tell you about 2 shows each. So a quadruple recommendation episode for you guys here. Ryan, would you like to go first, or do you want me to kind of lead by example?
No, you know what? This is a great segue, because one of the shows that I was going to talk about was a show called She Does.
Perfect. Let's hear about it.
Yeah, She Does is a show about women in creative, in all kinds of media, but especially in creative spaces. It's led by 2 documentary filmmakers, and they are doing their own podcast, which is a really excellent voice for the podcast format, or the medium, I guess. They're this great mixture of biography and documentary, so you really get a sense of what each subject is about, but then you see it from their own perspective too, and it's just a really fascinating look into a lot of different areas where you wouldn't normally see. Like, one of the episodes was about a photographer, a documentary photographer, and just her life behind the scenes and what it had taken for her to connect with her subjects to really be able to make her art about them. Another one was about a woman who was working for nonprofit organizations and making documentary projects to boost those nonprofit efforts, and just the kind of mixture of promotion and creativity that goes into that, and just a really great variety of subjects, and just that documentary spin was something I had never really seen much of in the podcast space. I'm sure there's more examples of it, but it's a really great show, and one that I can't wait to see more of. There's 7 or 8 episodes now, and they've all just been excellent so far.
Excellent. And that one are they a part of a network or anything like that? Or are they an individual production?
I don't believe that they are part of a network. If they are, I haven't seen which one it is, but as far as I know, they're not.
Well, that's excellent. Hey, I'm not either, so
yeah,
that's great, and that's a new one for me, and something that I definitely would want to check out as well. So, She Does. That's the correct name. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct.
And you have a review of that on your site as well, folks, over on ryansteiner.com, and a link to that show and that review will also be in the show notes as well. So make sure to check out the show notes for the links to the shows as well as Ryan's reviews, written version, if you will.
Yes.
All right, my first show recommendation, and I will do my best to use this segue, although it's probably not really. I'm cheating, so to speak. My first one has 4 hosts, and 2 of them are women. Yeah, that's probably cheating. This is a show called Couple Things Podcast, and they are also a very new show, so I am happy to tell all you folks about them. They are on Twitter at Couple Things Pod, and their website, couplethingspodcast.com. Very easy to remember. Their hosts are Ben, Molly, Michelle, and Ray, and the trick here, if you guys haven't figured it out yet, these are 2 couples. So it is a weekly show. Their format is each one of these individuals bring their own topic each week. So you get 4 topics, and they basically just riff back and forth. It's very laid back. It's very casual. But these 4 have a great dynamic. And at this moment in time, they're only 10 or 12 episodes in. And to be honest with you, I've actually started all the way back at the beginning, and I'm only up through about 8 or so. So I'm not even current yet, but I've more than heard enough that I wanted to add this to a recommendation here on the Podcast Digest. It's very clear these folks have been longtime friends, and they strike a real solid balance between what I would call that laid-back style, but the adherence to the format that they've set sort of helps keep things organized. I haven't heard another show take this exact approach, although I'm sure they're out there. But for me, this is the first one I've heard with 2 couples every week and basically 4 hosts. They've got some great intro and outro music that they had a band produce for them, and their sound quality is very good for being such a new show. And one of the things about this style of podcast that I've mentioned before on several other episodes here of the Podcast Digest is when these are individuals and they end up talking about real life stuff or their opinions on real life stuff, you really get to know these individuals. And in such a short amount of time, these guys have done a great job on letting you learn who they are. They're 4 distinct personalities. You can go to their website. They got a bunch of pictures of them up there. And these guys are probably mid to late 20s. And if I'm wrong, I'm sure they'll let me know. The reason I say that is that these guys have an extraordinarily engaged presence in social media. One that, and I think that's a really super important thing, especially if the gist of your show is about folks getting to know you. If you're really engaged in social media, that is just another outreach or connection between you and your audience. And these guys have talked about in some of the episodes that they didn't think anyone would ultimately be listening, and all of a sudden they're starting to spread pretty quickly. Their follower count on Twitter keeps jumping up. I know they've even charted in iTunes once about sometime back in mid-April. They did make an appearance in their category on iTunes. So they're really off to a great start, and they're doing well, and they engaged with me almost off the bat. And one of the reasons I wanted to recommend them here on the show was that they never asked me to recommend them. And that is such an unusual thing. And I know there's a lot of podcasters who listen to this, and I don't want to go off on a tangent or on a soapbox, but they just started interacting with me, talking back and forth, commenting on my show, and I started to, send them comments that I thought they were doing a great job, and it just became an interaction between sort of two shows or two people, and that was great, and that made me want to keep listening. Whereas some shows that I've never listened to, I've never heard, and they are just reaching out to me as if I'm some type of, publicity machine. That's not what I'm here to do. And Ryan, I imagine that's not your thing with your site either, is it?
No, not really. But I mean, I have received some great tips that way. But yeah, not so much a vending machine.
Exactly, right?
Like we'll get subscribers.
And what's funny is I don't mind somebody shooting me a message or a mention or an email and saying, hey, this is what I do. If you got a chance to listen to it, I'd love to have your opinion. I almost always listen to that. Always. But I've had other folks out there that are literally like hammering me week in and week out and constantly say, so, I'd really love to be on, or, if, hey, a mention from you would be really cool. And, those type of things are they get a little much. But back to a couple things. So these guys are doing a great job out there. If you're anywhere from, 18 to 50. This is probably something you're going to enjoy in terms of what these guys talk about. It's, they've covered everything from sports to favorite foods to, even greater, opinion pieces about some more serious topic matter. It's a great show. I think they're doing big things, and I think that you're going to hear about this one for a while, and I imagine a year from now they're going to be much bigger than probably any of us. So couplethingspodcast.com, Ben, Molly, Michelle, and Ray, they're doing a great job, and they deserve your subscription. Check them out. So
that sounds great.
And you haven't heard that one, right, Ryan?
No, I haven't.
Oh.
I'm going to check it out now, though.
And that's great. And that's exactly what we would like you to do as well, folks. You should literally have like the search field in your podcast app open as we continue to go through these lists. Just actively type them in, hit subscribe. And when this episode's done, go back and sample all these shows that we're talking about. Trust me, it will be worth your time. Our third show recommendation, back to you, Ryan.
Yeah, this one is called Monster Talk, which is a show it's from Skeptic. I think it's Skeptic Magazine, or just Skeptic, the website and the publication. And it's from a Blake Smith, and it's co-hosted by Dr. Karen Stolznow, who is a linguist. And so the two of them have experts on the show. They talk about urban legends, and they talk about monsters, and they talk about all kinds of things under that umbrella. But I love it because it's a mixture of the Ask an Expert format, but you also get into some really interesting historical just weirdness, mostly about American lore and American folklore. And but one of my favorite episodes, for instance, is about cats, demon-possessed cats, which I had no idea that there was enough material to warrant a whole episode on demon-possessed cats, but apparently that's a huge part of folklore, and there's some really crazy tales about demon-possessed cats, one that roams the underbelly of the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C., for instance. So there's just all kinds of weirdness. I love weirdness in podcasts. The weirder you get, the better, generally speaking. So it has that great weird element to it. One of the most recent episodes is about in the late 80s and early 90s, there was the whole satanic panic in the U.S., and there was this crusade against Dungeons and Dragons, which I've written about a little bit because that's something I've really come to love as an adult, is role-playing games and Dungeons and Dragons and all that kind of nerdy stuff. But when I was a kid, I wasn't allowed to play or interact with any of that stuff. So it's been really interesting to go back with a more historical viewpoint and learn about that period that I remember living through. So it's just a really fascinating place to learn about monsters, where they come from, why people dream them up, and you get to hear from some really interesting corners of academia for people that have written about this folklore and urban legend.
Yeah, that's definitely a new one for me. But sounds wildly interesting that, out there on the fringes type thing. That is not something you would necessarily hear on NPR.
No, and it's a funny one too, because I was thinking I plan to write on it soon, but I was trying to think about where I discovered it and how I heard about it. And I don't really visit Skeptic. I don't read their site much, and I don't really see many other publications talking about it. I have no idea how this show came into my feed, but it's just been in there for as long as I can remember. I don't know where it came from. So in some ways, it's almost its own urban legend in my phone that just sort of appeared into something that occasionally pops up with some really great stuff. So.
Well, it's definitely hard to say how that could have happened, but, with as many subscriptions as you got, maybe it just made its way in there on its own through a mass, dozen subscription binge. It just found its way in.
Well, it's a happy accident if that's what it was.
And that's definitely something new, and something new to this show in terms of recommending something along that style. So I thank you for bringing that to the table, because that's, not something, like you said, that I necessarily would have come across. Let me ask you, what is sort of their angle, so to speak? Is it conspiracy theory type where they try to claim these things are real, or not that?
No, it's the opposite of that.
Gotcha.
If I had one criticism for the show, it's that Blake sometimes is like, well, yeah, obviously this isn't true, though. Like, just to make sure that we're on the same page, that we don't really believe it, which for me is kind of like, I'd like to pretend sometimes. But it's definitely more of the mind of like trying to show where these myths originated, how they came to be as popular as they are, and sort of dispelling the mystery around them. But it's not from this is real, we have to prove it, so much as kind of the opposite realm of it.
Gotcha. Well, this is going to be a much better segue than the one I attempted to do last time. Because when we're talking about the stories behind things, there is a show that I want to tell you guys about. It is the fourth recommendation for this episode, my second one. It is called Lore Podcast. It's at Lore Podcast. The host and creator is Aaron Mahnke. He is at AMAHNKE on Twitter. And their website is lorepodcast.com, and that's LORE podcast.com, in case anyone is not hearing this correctly. Link in the show notes, of course. And their website, sometimes I like to borrow their descriptions from their website, because I think they do it the best themselves, and Aaron has done a great job describing what Lore is. Lore is a bi-weekly podcast about the history behind scary stories. The people, places, and things of our darkest nightmares all have real facts at their core. Each episode of Lore looks into a uniquely scary tale and uncovers the truth of what's behind it. Sometimes the truth is more frightening than fiction. And he is a very new show. At the time of the recording, only 4 episodes in. He is, as I mentioned, every 2 weeks on the release schedule. And let me tell you, folks, I have recommended any number of shows in sort of the storytelling genre, but Aaron Mahnke's production value associated with Lore is second to none. Wow. In recent interviews, I've talked to, Vanessa Lowe with Nocturne, and also Kyle Jest with the Lapse podcast. Aaron Mahnke's Lore fits directly shoulder with shoulder with those two folks and the work that they are doing. He has a bed of music under his narration that is so... what's the word I'm looking for? Fitting to the story and mood setting. And I think Aaron's just got a great narration voice. He puts huge amount of research and writing into each episode. He is a writer by chance. He writes horror stories. And the story is that, in his assembly for the novels he writes, he kept coming across these great historical tales and decided that, these are great stories that people should hear, and eventually decided to tie this into its own podcast. And it is pretty amazing what these first few episodes have been like. And again, with so many other creators that I've talked to, it's amazing to me that by and large, this is a singular individual that is able to put this together. You know, a lot of you out there are podcast hosts, and we all have a certain amount of time and effort off mic that goes into putting out each episode. But, you know, the folks that I just mentioned, Kyle Jest, Vanessa Lowe, and now Aaron Menke, their work that they put into off mic is exponentially larger than the vast majority of us. And it comes through in your earbuds when you're listening. The premise, I think, is wildly interesting as well. The actual facts behind some of history's scariest stories. So in the previous episodes, and some of the first few, one of the ones that really stood out to me is episode 2, called The Bloody Pit, was about a construction of a tunnel in western Massachusetts that happened 150 years ago, and apparently over 200 people died in the construction of this tunnel. And he goes through and tells the story of, you know, how certain individuals died in the construction of the tunnel, what local residents have seen after in terms of their claim of haunting, and all the evidence about what happened and what shouldn't have happened, and decisions that were made. It was wildly interesting, and nothing like it in terms of a podcast episode that I've heard really anywhere else. He does a phenomenal job researching this stuff, digging this stuff up, putting it into a narration that he reads back. Being every 2 weeks, it's not going to pollute your feed. It's worth a subscription. He's got a great logo, and there's something about simplicity in a logo that really does it for me. And it's just, you know, a dark gray background with the white kind of scrawly word lore. It's perfect.
Yeah.
It looks,
I'm looking at it now, and it just looks like something written from beyond the grave.
Yeah, it's so
like
simple.
That,
you know, it's so simple, but it's one of those where it's like, wow, that's great.
Yeah.
It's not a horror podcast. It's not something you're going to be, you know, scared out of your mind or anything like that. I don't want to misrepresent it. It's just basically the backstory behind some of the spooky stuff that actually happened. And it's really well done. Aaron's doing a great job. I should mention as well, he has just started a Patreon, patreon.com/lore podcast. If you do check this out, and, you know, each episode is 20 minutes or less. So again, it will not pollute your feed or consume your whole week. If you do like what he's doing, throw him a buck over on Patreon. I think once you hear it, you will see why, it's worth supporting great creators like Aaron and like Lore. But again, this is another one, and I love when this happens. So Ryan, you hadn't heard this show yet.
No, I am incredibly excited to listen to it. That's right up my alley of just sort of the chilling and, you know, the spooky, or a little bit kind of on the fringes. It reminds me, have you heard of Here Be Monsters?
No, I haven't heard of that one. I saw it on your site.
Oh, man. Yes. Here Be Monsters is excellent. Kind of not really, sort of in the same territory, just of sort of the stuff at the edges. And sort of that undertone, that undercurrent. Maybe it sounds like Lore at least has sort of maybe a sort of a menacing, not meta, I don't know. Words fail me. Words fail me when these podcasts do it so much better. But just sort of a dark tone that we don't really see a whole lot of, that I have started to see more of, like with Nocturne, just sort of on the periphery, you know, maybe just what's outside of your vision, or kind of the things just a little bit beyond that I really enjoyed seeing lately. So I'm really excited for Lore. That sounds excellent.
It is, and I think you'll enjoy it, and I think that Aaron's onto something here, and I hope that he continues it. You know, Aaron Menke is also co-host on a show on the 5x5 network. You folks may remember I had Sarah Stewart from Getting There, who is a member of the 5x5 network, and so Aaron is an experienced podcaster and conversationalist on his 5x5 show, but this one is very different in terms of what he's going for and what he is putting together. And it is, once again, something that I think that more folks need to know about. I believe, just to kind of give you an idea of quality here, I believe Aaron was featured in iTunes right out of the gate. I believe he was right into New and Noteworthy with his first or second episode, because somebody, in Apple even recognized that this is something people need to hear. And I think he's doing well. I'm sure anyone else who would come and check it out, that Aaron would be greatly appreciative as well. So those are our 4 podcast recommendations for this recommendation show. Ryan's told you about She Does and Monster Talk, and from me, you've got Couple Things Podcast and Lore. All great shows and all folks that you should be checking out. Let them know you heard about them on the Podcast Digest. And before we wrap up for this week, Ryan, I want to thank you for joining me. This is great. I love having a co-host with these type of things.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. This was a blast, and I can't wait to listen to both of these shows. They sound excellent.
Great. And before we go, tell folks one more time where they can find your written reviews or anything else you're doing out there you'd like to let people know about.
Yeah, you can find me at my website. It's ryansteiner.com, RyanSteiner. And then you can also find me on Twitter at Tevin, TEHVIN. And I post lots of podcast-related stuff there, too. So just more of the flotsam and jetsam that doesn't make it to the main reviews. So, yeah, either one of those places is great.
Excellent. And folks, links to both Ryan's site and his Twitter account will be in the show notes, as always. And folks, once again, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to another episode of the Podcast Digest. 4 new shows this week, and I'll be back again next week with more great things for your subscription list. Until then, my name is Dan Lizette. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Podcast Digest. You can follow the show on Twitter at Pod Digest. Like the show on Facebook at facebook.com/The Podcast Digest. Email the show feedback at thepodcastdigest@gmail.com. And you can find all the previous episodes and exclusive blog entries at the show's website, thepodcastdigest.info.